The high plains of Montana don't forgive sentiment. They don't have the softness for it. The wind comes down off the Rockies with a kind of indifference that strips a person clean, takes the pretense, takes the performance, takes everything that was put on for other people's comfort, and leaves behind only what's real. Most people find that terrifying. The ones who stay learn to call it honest. Gideon Holt had stayed for 22 years. He was 47 years old, a man who moved through the world as though he were always expecting to be asked to leave it. He had a cattle ranch outside a town called Faro that nobody outside of Cascade County had ever heard of, a dog named December who was mostly deaf, and a reputation for being the kind of man you could trust with your silence. He had been married once. Her name had been Vera, and she had died in the second winter after their wedding, in the kind of quiet way that makes the grief worse. No dramatic moment, no final words worth keeping. Just a woman there, and then not there, and a house that never learned how to be quiet without her. That was 14 years ago. Since then, Holt had become very good at finishing things. He finished fences. He finished meals. He finished the day's work before dark and went to bed without ceremony and woke before dawn to start again. He did not begin things he wasn't certain he could complete. He did not ask for more than he needed, and he had very quietly, without ever saying it out loud, decided that the life he was living was sufficient. Not good, not the life he'd imagined at 25, but sufficient. He was replacing a split rail on the east fence line the morning Della Birch arrived. He heard the wagon before he saw it. Not the sound of someone who knew where they were going, but the sound of someone who had been going a long time and was running out of reasons to keep going. The horse was tired. The wheels needed grease, and the woman holding the reins looked, when she finally pulled up at the gate, like she had not slept in longer than she was willing to admit. She was young, 26, maybe 28. She had dark hair pulled back under a hat that had seen better seasons, and the kind of eyes that had been doing a lot of calculating lately and hadn't liked the results. She sat very straight in the seat. That was the first thing he noticed. Not her face, not her clothes, but the straightness of her spine, the particular posture of a person who has decided that dignity is the one thing they will not surrender, no matter what else goes. "Are you Gideon Holt?" she said. He said he was. "My name is Della Birch." She didn't say it like an introduction. She said it like a statement of fact that she was tired of having to explain. "My grandfather was August Birch." He said, "You'd know the name." Holt set down his fencing tool. He did know the name. August Birch had been the best horse trader in 3 counties and the worst card player Holt had ever had the misfortune of sitting across a table from, which is how they had become friends. Holt had cleaned the man out over 2 winters, and August, instead of being bitter about it, had decided this made Holt someone worth knowing. They had ridden together off and on for the better part of a decade. Holt hadn't seen him in 5 years. He hadn't heard about any granddaughter. "August sent you," Holt said. "August died," Della said, 4 months ago. She said it without flinching, but there was something in the set of her mouth that told him the not flinching cost her something. "Before he did, he told me to find you," he said. She stopped. She looked at him steadily. "He said you were the most stubborn, honest man he'd ever met, and that you would probably tell me you couldn't help. He said to tell you that you owe him $60 from the winter of '89. Holt was quiet for a moment. "That wasn't how that game ended," he said. "You'd say that too." The dog, December, appeared from somewhere behind Holt and stood at the fence, looking at the wagon with the vague interest of an animal who has stopped expecting much. The wind moved through the grass. The horse in Della's harness dropped its head. "What did he send you here for?" Holt asked. She reached into the front of the wagon and produced a folded envelope. She held it out over the gate. He walked over and took it without opening it. "He wrote it before he got too sick to write," she said. "He made me promise not to read it. I kept the promise." Holt looked at the envelope. He didn't open it. "Come inside," he said. "Your horse needs water." She didn't thank him. He noticed that and found to his mild surprise that he didn't mind. He read the letter at the kitchen table. She stayed in the doorway, not quite in, not quite out, the way a person stands when they're not sure whether they're welcome and aren't willing to pretend otherwise. December settled at Holt's feet, snoring softly. August's handwriting was the handwriting of a man who had spent his life outdoors and considered the pen a necessary inconvenience. The letters were large and uneven and absolutely certain of themselves. Gideon, if Della got to you, she made it, which means she's tougher than you're giving her credit for right now. She is my daughter's only child. Her mother is gone. Her father was a man who didn't deserve the word. She has been managing the Birch property alone for 2 years, and she did it well until the bank decided she hadn't. The short of it is there is nothing left and she has nowhere to go. I am not asking you to take responsibility for her. She would hate that. What I am asking is this: give her work. Real work, for real pay, for 1 season. She will not waste it. After that, she will find her own way, or she won't, but at least she'll have had the chance. You told me once, at the edge of the Judith River the winter we drove those horses north, that you wished you had someone at the ranch who gave a damn about the land the way you did. August, there was a postscript. She also knows more about horses than you do. This is not an opinion. This is a fact. Don't argue with her about it. Holt folded the letter. He looked at Della, who had not moved from the doorway. He had no right, Holt said quietly. It wasn't anger, just fact. No, she said. He didn't. She shifted her weight slightly. I'm not here for charity. I want to be clear about that before we go any further. I'm here because he asked me to come, and because I have enough respect for what he asked to at least try. But if you're going to do this out of obligation, I'd rather know now. Holt looked at the letter in his hands. There's a room at the back of the house, he said. The roof holds. Supper's at 6. He stood up and walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. One thing, he said, without turning. The north pasture. There's a section I've left untouched for 12 years. Don't ask me about it. I don't discuss it. A pause. All right, she said. He went out. Della stood in the kitchen alone. She looked at the letter still on the table, at the handwriting she recognized as her grandfather's, even though she hadn't read the words, and she thought about the old man who had spent his last months writing to a man he hadn't seen in 5 years on her behalf. She felt, briefly, something crack open in her chest. She held it together with effort. Then she went to see about her horse. The first 2 weeks were built out of work and weather and the particular silence of 2 people who have agreed, without saying so, not to make things harder than they already are. Della rose before dawn. That surprised him, though he didn't say so. She had the coffee on before he came in from the barn, and she'd done it without being asked and without making anything of it. She wasn't performing helpfulness. She was simply helping, which was different. She was, as advertised, extraordinary with horses. She had a way of standing still near an animal that communicated something he had never been able to put into language. The 2 geldings that had been fighting their traces since spring let her near them on the 2nd day. The mare that had been favoring her left foreleg walked evenly within the week. Holt had been working with those horses for months. He watched Della spend 20 minutes with the mare and felt something he could not quite name. Not envy, not gratitude, something closer to recognition. The feeling of watching a person be exactly who they are. They didn't talk much. She asked about the land. He answered in facts. He asked about her grandfather's horse operation in the years after he'd lost touch. She answered in facts. They built something functional between them out of the exchange of practical information, and neither of them reached past it. On the 11th day, the north fence came down in a storm. Not just a rail or a post. A full section, 40 yards of fencing, taken out by a cottonwood that had been leaning for years and finally made its decision. The cattle were through the gap before morning. Holt came out at first light to find December running circles around himself in the yard, and Della already on horseback, riding out to turn the herd. He followed. They spent 5 hours in the cold bringing the cattle back. She rode without showboating, efficiently and with a quality of attention that told him she'd done this in conditions worse than this. When the last steer was back through and they'd put up a temporary barrier, She dismounted and looked at the damaged fence line with the practical eyes of someone calculating what would be needed. 3 days' work, she said. If you have the posts. I have the posts. She nodded. Then we should start in the morning, before another front comes through. We. She said it without emphasis, without meaning anything by it. Just the natural grammatical conclusion to what they were doing, which was working together. But it was the first time either of them had used the word, and he noticed it, and she had noticed him notice it, and they both went on as though none of that had happened. That night, he lit a fire in the yard because the wood needed clearing anyway and not for any other reason. He was sitting with it when he heard her boots on the porch steps. She didn't ask permission. She sat on the other side of the fire and looked up at the sky the way he'd seen her look at the horses, not searching, just being with it. After a while, she said, "He used to tell me the best thing a person could do was learn to be somewhere, not always be going, not always be planning the next thing. Just be in the place where you are." August, Holt said. Yes. He looked up. The sky over Montana in October is something that doesn't translate into language very well. He had looked at it for 22 years without feeling much of anything. That night, something moved. He was that way, Holt said. He was the only man I knew who could sit on the back of a wagon going nowhere for 2 hours and not seem like he was wasting time. He wasn't wasting it, Della said. No. She looked across the fire at him. Not the way people look when they want something. The way they look when they're trying to understand something. It was the same look she gave the horses. What was this place before? She asked. Before you were alone in it. He was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. Different, he said. She didn't push. That was when he began to think that August had known what he was doing. What gets you about that scene, sitting beside that fire, is not the words. It's what doesn't get said. Two people who have both lost something too large to carry by themselves, sitting on opposite sides of a flame, testing whether it's safe to put the weight down. I've sat by enough fires to know that the best conversations are the ones where nobody says very much at all. They rode into Faro on the 1st of November for supplies. Holt had been dreading it the way you dread anything that involves other people having opinions about your life. Faro was not a malicious town, but it was attentive. It had a long memory and a short tolerance for what it didn't understand. He could feel the attention as they tied the horses in front of the dry goods store. Measured looks. The particular quality of quiet that means people are making decisions about you. Inside, the woman behind the counter, a widow named Blanche Hooper who had run the store for 30 years and knew everything worth knowing in Cascade County, gave Della a look that started cautious and ended, after about 90 seconds of watching her, read a supply list without any self-consciousness at all, in something closer to approval. Outside, on the way back to the wagon, a man named Decker stepped off the sidewalk into their path. He was the kind of man who took up more room than he needed and considered this a personality. He looked at Della, then at Holt. "Didn't know you were hiring," he said. The word held all the freight it was intended to hold. Holt stopped. He felt Della go still beside him. He turned to look at Decker with the kind of calm that has nothing peaceful about it. "She's the best hand in the county," Holt said. "And you're standing in front of my wagon." Decker held his gaze for a moment, decided the math wasn't in his favor, and moved. On the road back to the ranch, the silence between them was warmer than it had been on the road in. "You didn't need to do that," Della said. "I know," Holt said. "Then why?" He kept his eyes on the road ahead. The grass was gold on both sides, and the mountains were beginning to take on their winter blue. "Because it was true," he said, "and because some things need to be said in front of witnesses." She was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather told me you were fair. He was generous." "He wasn't," she said. "He was accurate." She said it without looking at him, and he felt something shift somewhere in the older and more stubborn parts of himself, the parts that had decided, quietly, that they were done with change. In the 5th week, he found her in the barn at dusk, sitting on an overturned feed bucket with a ledger open on her knee. Not his ledger, something else, He started to back away, but she had already looked up. "Sorry," he said. "You don't have to be." She closed the ledger. "It's your barn." He stayed in the doorway. "What is that?" She looked at the ledger for a moment. "Calculations," she said. "I've been figuring out what the breeding schedule on those two mares could produce over 3 years if you timed it right, and what it would be worth." She paused. "You're underusing them." He looked at her. "I didn't ask," she said. "I know I can put it away if show me," he said. He sat down on the other side of the barn, and she talked for 40 minutes about bloodlines and timing and market values and seasonal rhythms, and she talked about it the way his grandfather had talked about the land. Not like a business, but like something alive that deserved to be taken seriously. By the end of it, he had said almost nothing. He was listening the way you listen when someone is saying things you already believed, but had never heard put into words. "How long have you been working this out?" he said. 3 weeks, she said. "I started when I got here. I couldn't sleep the first few nights." He looked at her. "Why didn't you say something?" "I didn't know if I was staying," she said simply. He had no answer to that. He went back to the house. He sat at the table for a long time without doing anything, which was not usual for him. That night she wasn't at supper. He found her outside, sitting on the fence rail that faced the north pasture in the near dark, looking at something he couldn't see. "Della," he said. She turned. Her eyes were dry, but there was something in her face that told him they had not always been so. "I have to tell you something," she said. "Something my grandfather didn't put in his letter because he knew if he had, you might not have opened the gate." He sat on the fence rail beside her, not close, just near. "I'm not just passing through," she said. "There's a man in Great Falls, a banker named Prosper Vane, who holds a claim against the Birch estate. The cattle, the equipment, even the land where my grandfather is buried. He says I owe him a debt I can't settle. He's been watching what I do." She paused. "Someone told him I came here." "He'll come." "When?" Holt said. "Before winter." She looked at her hands. "I should have told you before I accepted the room and the work. But my grandfather said." She stopped. She looked up. "He said you'd keep me here if you wanted to, not because you felt you had to. He wanted me to let you decide that for yourself first, before you knew." That was the thing that stopped him. Not the news about Vane, not the debt. The fact of a dying man designing this whole careful thing so that the decision was clean, so that when it came time to choose, it would be a real choice and not one made under pressure. Here's the part I keep thinking about. August Birch could have put every piece of that in the letter, and Holt would have read it and made his decision with all the information. But then it would have been a rescue, not a choice. The old man knew the difference. Most people never learn it. Holt looked at the north pasture. In the dark, the grass was silver. "Vera's buried there," he said. He had not said her name out loud in 3 years. He wasn't sure why he said it now, except that it seemed wrong not to, given what she'd just told him. Della said nothing. She let the name settle. "She died in the second winter," he said. "We were going to fix the north fence in the spring. I never did." A long silence. "I understand that," Della said. And the way she said it, not with pity, not with the careful sympathy people perform when they want you to know they're listening, told him that she did. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark listening to the wind come down off the mountains, and he thought about all the rooms inside himself that he had locked carefully for good reasons years ago and had not opened since. The room with Vera's name on it. The room with the plan for the north fence. The room where he had kept the idea of a life that was more than sufficient. Around 3 in the morning, he admitted something. He did not want her to go. Not because of August. Not because of what she knew about the horses. Because in 5 weeks, this place had started to sound different. Not loud. It wasn't a loud kind of difference. But when she moved through the barn had a different quality of quiet. When she sat across the table felt like it was being used for what tables were for. He had not known he was missing that. He had been so careful not to know. He was afraid of it, the way you're afraid of a river you know needs to be crossed, because you know what rivers can take. The next morning, before she was up, He rode to Faro and went to the county recorder's office. He asked about Vane's claim. The clerk was familiar with it. He was also familiar with the statute that said such a claim had limited enforcement reach if the individual in question was formally employed and domiciled on an established property with documented status. "What kind of documentation?" Holt asked. The clerk looked at him for a moment. "Employment contract would help," he said. "Marriage record would be better." Holt said nothing. He paid for the clerk's time and rode home slowly, letting the horse take its own pace through the long grass, thinking. By the time he reached his gate, he knew what he was going to say. Not because of Vane, not because of the clerk's office. Because he had spent 14 years being a man who'd made peace with enough, and he was discovering, late and inconveniently, that peace and alive were not the same thing. She was at the corral with the mare when he came through the gate. She turned at the sound of the horse. He dismounted. He did not make a production of it. "I don't want you to go," he said. She looked at him. "I know that isn't a plan," he said. "I know it doesn't solve Vane. I know there are things we'd need to work out, and I'm not standing here pretending otherwise." He stopped. He had not prepared this. He was not a man who said unrehearsed things, and the discomfort of it was visible on his face in a way he couldn't control. "But I have spent a long time being careful about not wanting things. And I am." He paused. "I am tired of being careful about that." Della stood very still. "My grandfather knew," she said quietly. "Didn't he? I think he had a theory. Stubborn old man. The worst card player I ever sat across from." She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the mare, then at the north pasture, then back at him. Not romantic scanning, the look of someone doing a real accounting. "I'm not easy," she said. "I need you to know that. I have opinions about horses and fences and how a property ought to be run, and I don't keep them quiet, I know. And I've had enough men make decisions for me that I'll push back the moment that starts. August warned me." "He didn't warn you enough." She paused. "What are you actually asking, Gideon?" He held her gaze. "I'm asking if you want to stay," he said, "properly. Not as a hand, and not as an obligation, and not because of Vane. I'm asking if this." He gestured at the ranch, the corral, the long gold grass, and the mountains behind it. "Is something you'd choose if you were choosing freely." The wind came down off the Rockies, the way it always does. It moved through the fence posts, through the dry grass, over the open face of the north pasture where the ground had been unbroken for 14 years. Della looked at the pasture. "The fence needs to be rebuilt," she said. "I know. In the spring. Yes. I'd like to help with that," she said. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even an acceptance, technically. But they both understood what it was, and neither of them felt the need to say anything more precise. Vane came on a Friday with a man he introduced as his associate, and a piece of paper he presented like it proved something. Holt was at the barn. Della was at the corral. Vane walked past Holt toward her, which told Holt everything he needed to know about the man's character. "The season is over, Miss Birch," Vane said. "Whatever arrangement you had here was informal." "It won't. She's not going anywhere," Holt said. He hadn't moved fast. He didn't need to. He was simply there, standing between Vane and Della, his voice carrying the flatness of a man whose decision is already made and is not interested in discussing it. "Carter, this is a legal matter. The woman—" "My intended," Holt said. The word moved through the air between them and settled. Vane looked at Della. Della said nothing. She looked at Vane with the particular calm of someone who is not afraid of him, and that calm was more effective than anything she could have said. Vane recalculated. "I'll need documentation," he said. "You'll have it by end of month," Holt said. Vane left. His associate went with him. Holt turned around. Della was looking at him with an expression that held several things at once. Not all of them simple. "You should have asked," she said. "I know," he said. "Ask me now." He did. Not with ceremony. Not with a bent knee or performed words. Standing in the afternoon light of a Montana October, with the mountains in every direction, and the mare watching from the corral with the mild interest of an animal that has seen stranger things. "I'm not a simple man," he said. I'm quiet, and I've spent a long time trying to want less, and I can't promise you the kind of life that starts easy. But I can promise that I'll see you. Every morning, every season, whatever the land does and whatever comes through the gate, I'll actually see you. I think that's worth something." She was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather's won $60 from you in '89, she said. He blinked. "That is absolutely not what happened." "He kept a record," she said. "I have it in my bag." There was a beat. "Then I'll pay the debt," he said, "if you'll take it as a first installment." She looked at him for a long time. "Yes," she said. They were married in Faro in December, with Blanche Hooper as a witness, and December the dog sitting at the courthouse door, mostly deaf and entirely undignified and perfectly suited to the occasion. Blanche cried, which surprised everyone, including Blanche. The ranch changed after that. Gradually, the way things change when they're changing for real. The north fence went up in April. It took 4 days and both of them, and a very stubborn corner post that Della finally set with a quiet persistence that Holt had come to recognize as the most effective force he'd ever been near. When the last rail was in, she stood back and looked at the line of it, clean and straight and solid from one end to the other, and said nothing at all, which was more than enough. The mares were bred according to her plan. The foals came in summer, strong and well-timed, and the first of them sold for more than the ranch had cleared in the previous 2 years combined. In the evenings, sometimes, they sat by the fire in the yard, and she talked about her grandfather, and he talked about Vera, and neither of them treated it as a wound that needed to be avoided. The winter after their first year, she told him. She said it simply, the way she said everything that mattered. He was at the kitchen table. She stood in the doorway, not quite in, not quite out, the same way she had stood the very first night. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he got up from the table, crossed the distance between them, and held her. Not dramatically, not with words. Just held her in the way that a person holds something they had, quietly, privately, without ever letting themselves say it plainly. Been afraid to hope for. Outside, the Montana wind came down off the mountains the way it always does, indifferent and clean, carrying no sentiment and no pretty stories. But inside that small and stubborn house at the edge of the high plains, something that had been locked for a long time was standing open, letting in the cold and the light and all the difficult necessary things that come with being, after so long, unmistakably alive. Somewhere, in the deep place where a grandfather's love outlasts his body, August Birch was having the last laugh about the $60. He had earned it.